Geek Alliance presents Narration Fixation number 11, Narrating Yourself and Beyond with Christopher Gronlund. My name is Tommy Howell, and today's guest is Christopher Gronlund, who is the author of Hell Comes with Wood Panel Doors. Chris, tell us how that got started and how you got into narrating that for yourself.
Hell Comes with Wood Panel Doors was the first novel I wrote, and it was one of those things that started out actually as a screenplay that, got some attention, but every time things would start getting a little closer to happening, somebody higher up the line in development would say, nah, and then I decided I'm going to make it a novel. That went nowhere, so I just shelved it and started working on other stuff. And I had a friend who, it would have been 2005, told me about Scott Sigler, Escape Pod podcast, and he's like, just podcast it. And I was terrified to do it because I don't really read out loud well because I'm dyslexic. But this friend, it took 4 years for him heckling me before I was finally unemployed and just decided, you know what, I may as well just finally do it and do the podcast, which is at roadtripfromhell.com. And, it was just a chapter a week, 21 chapters.
So did you record it all in advance before you started publishing, or did you just do it week to week?
I mostly had... I like having anywhere between 2 to 4 weeks ahead, so I didn't have the entire thing recorded.
But you had it written already.
Oh yeah, it was definitely written. It had gone through so many rejections on so many different levels of what it was, and everybody who read it liked it. They were just kind of like, I don't know how I would market this. It's a humorous coming-of-age story about a family traveling cross-country in a possessed station wagon, which today might have sold, but at the time, it was the right after 9/11, that kind of time, and people just really, they liked the writing, but they just were like, it's too quirky for us. So it was perfect for podcasting because, now it actually gets more listens each day than the other podcast I do does in a week.
So what are you doing to promote that book in particular besides your other podcast?
I am doing absolutely nothing now to promote it because I did that in 2010.
Okay.
And just that it's out there, people, I don't know if people are sharing it, but my whole thing has always been, okay, when it comes out, I'll promote it, which, I had friends. At the time, I didn't even really know much about podcasting. But where actually some of the promotion came was when I was looking for a theme song. I went to Creative Commons, and I found through, I think it was Jamendo.com, a surf band out of Belgium called Parado Ketchup.
That's something you don't hear every day. So.
Right, and I just let them know, hey, I think it's really cool that you do stuff Creative Commons for people. Just wanted to let you know I'm doing this. So then people in Belgium started, we're still friends. And, so there was that little bit of promotion with them, with other friends. But since I was mainly just doing it because I was unemployed and bored at the time, and just my friend Larry kept saying, podcast, you just need to get out and start doing something, I had no idea really what I was doing.
So have you looked at getting it put on to Audiobooks or some other site like that would give it even more activity promotion?
Yes, I think about that all the time, and I just don't get around, and that's where there's definitely a lot to be said for the people who can sit there and schedule things, and I'm good at doing that with new stuff. But
it's been sitting there for 4 years. You're not going to go pack it up and repackage it.
And I'm actually planning to take the whole week of Thanksgiving off this year and record in an entirety a novella, and at that point strip out the stuff that the intros and the actual podcast stuff, because audiobooks, it's just kind of, hey, this is the thing, a little bit of music and that, and I spend probably anywhere between about 5 to 7 minutes before each episode, kind of talking about the chapter, how it came to be, things like that. So I have to go back and strip all that stuff out for things like audiobooks. It's just a matter of doing it when you're doing a lot of work and trying to come up with new stuff.
So I titled this episode Narrating Yourself and Beyond. Let's talk about first narrating yourself. What kind of challenges did you have in that respect, since you said you weren't comfortable reading out loud? So
I definitely was not comfortable reading out loud because back in school they didn't really know I was dyslexic until they threw me into the learning disability classes in 7th and 8th grade. They just thought I was shy, whatever, and then teachers told me, okay, you're dyslexic, and that was all. That was it. There was no real.
So there was no follow-up.
Yeah, there was no real help. It was just, well, for a couple hours a day, you get to come out of normal classes and become an additional. This is an additional thing that you could be ridiculed for. You go to the learning disability lab for a couple hours a day, and they just let you do whatever you wanted. So I had this paranoia of reading out loud because I was never good at it, even though I've always loved words, I've always loved reading to myself. But reading out loud was always a very, very difficult thing for me. So when I started actually recording Hell Comes with Wood Panel Doors, I did it with this mic, which is the Samsung 30CU, just a USB mic, and I kind of came up with voices for the characters, but at the time I would have to read a lot of those lines 10 to 15 times just to get them down, which meant it was a good thing I was unemployed because I had the time to spend the 8 to 12 hours to edit each chapter because it was that difficult. But then I realized toward the end of the book, I might be able to get through a whole paragraph without having to reread something. And now, if it's something I'm familiar enough with, I can kind of get through it. But at the time, it was a very difficult thing.
So is that the only thing you've narrated so far, is that one novel?
Yes, that's the only thing, and I've started kind of doing some test voices and things like that for a novella called Old Man, which I plan to record in November.
Right. Is that going to be another podcast product, or is that going
Yes.
to be... Okay.
Yeah, I love podcasting fiction, and then the other thing is the last novel I did was met with the same kind of rejection, I guess, that Hell Comes with Wood Panel Doors got, which is, hey, this is great. I was submitting to some of the top 10 agents I always wanted, and they all read it and they liked it. They want to see more writing, but for that particular piece, they were like, it's kind of quirky, and I'm kind of thinking about even doing that as a podcast just to see, because the things that seem to do well fiction-wise with podcasts tend to be genre, quirky, humor, things along those lines. And the last thing I wrote is more kind of a contemporary adult fiction, even though there's a mystery element in it. It would be more, I guess you would say, upmarket fiction, not quite literary, because I'm not that good with prose.
Okay.
But I would consider it upmarket fiction, and it would be interesting to see how people would take to that as far as a podcast. That kind of stuff does good as an actual audiobook. Somebody like my mom, commuting, CDs, will listen to serious fiction as an audiobook, but as far as podcasts that I see that do well as far as fiction, it's usually science fiction, fantasy, humor.
So what books do you have for sale at a site like Amazon?
At Amazon, Hell Comes with Wood Panel Doors is there. Old Man, which I'll be recording in November, is there. And then I have kind of a long short story that's called Big Top, which is a mystery that takes place in a circus, and a couple other short stories.
And so this serious product, it's not published yet?
No, I'm actually now thinking of doing that as an ebook and getting it out on Amazon, but there'll be some editing and time involved with that, and I'm currently working on the next novel. That's the thing with me. I don't take rejection really hard, but what I do is just kind of jettison things and then move on.
Well, I would be curious to hear your experience of dealing with the audiobook side of things on Amazon if you get to that point.
Yeah, I've never done that. The guy that I do my weekly podcast with, Men in Gorilla Suits, Sean Kupfer, writes a science fiction series.
So does he read those, or does he have somebody else narrate those, or are they audiobooks yet?
The first one is an audiobook, and it did pretty well. I can't remember who read it, but I think that's his only one available as an audiobook.
Okay. Well, so let's talk about what else you've been doing with audio since I said beyond. Men in Gorilla Suits. I have not listened to the show, actually. I've listened to part of Hell Comes with Wood Panel Doors, but I've not actually listened to Men in Gorilla Suits. So tell us what that's about and what the listener could expect when they check that out.
Okay, Men in Gorilla Suits is a weekly philosophical look at pop culture. We tend to, if we're talking about Star Trek, we will chat Trek, and Sean is really big time into Trek. He'll love this because the poster behind you. Yes. And so he'll love that, but we tend to kind of look at, we did a whole episode about Star Trek, which is actually, I'm not the big Trek fan. My wife is, and all my friends are. So by default, I got into it, and I like it now. But so being able to talk about it and hear Sean talk about it and have to think about it, I really realized really how badass Star Trek is. So there are those moments of enlightenment like that, but we also, like the podcast that's up right now is about immigration. Sometimes we will talk about something current, or we'll just come up with a weird theme. We did one that was about losing things, and it was, an item that you lost from your childhood that you'd love to have today. We both told the clumsy stories of losing our virginity to serious things, losing relatives, things like that. So really, it's an excuse for Sean and I to hang out. We met while we were both tech writers at a mortgage company, and we always talked about podcasting. And after I left right before the layoffs hit, and he was laid off. After that, we were just like, let's stop talking about podcasting and just do a weekly show. And most of it is geeky, but we tend to kind of talk about occasional serious things, although Sean will always work Star Trek into it somewhere along the line.
So quirky humor, more of that, or is it more serious?
A little bit of both. We'll talk about we did a whole episode about violence, and so it's something that is obviously a serious topic, and it's not like we're cutting jokes or anything, but in chatting about violence, you start realizing how funny, in a weird, sad way, a lot of people are, where they'll just get angry and escalate something to violence. And it's not that we're joking about it, but we're not being somber in the podcast, so even the more serious episodes tend to be, we're not obviously our gear isn't as good as like NPR, we're not as well spoken, but we occasionally do a serious show. And
so
then
with levity.
Yeah, we'll do a serious show, and then we'll turn around and do just something about humor, or we did a whole episode about comedy. So it's just pretty much whatever we come up with, and we always record 2 episodes together at the same time.
Okay.
Sean comes up with one, he's in charge. I come up with one, I'm in charge. Tomorrow we're recording addiction and cover tunes. So that gives you an idea. Sean picked addiction, and I just was listening to cover tunes, and it hit me that people knock cover tunes as these bad things. I like classical music, and it never hit me. Most of the classical music I listen to is really a cover tune in a roundabout way. So why not make this a show?
That's an interesting spin. Yeah.
So that's what that show's like.
Yes. Interesting. So besides this upcoming novella, what other upcoming projects do you want to talk about?
I'm just working on my next novel, which is called A Magic Life, and takes place. Well, it's about a female magician born in a circus in the 20s and her rise to fame in the 40s and 50s. It was going to be just one novel, and somewhere along the way I just decided I'll make it a trilogy, so I have no idea what's going to happen with it, but I'm a little over halfway done with that. Should have a draft of that done. And then I'm thinking about I love doing the weekly show with Sean. We go an hour, and I know that there are some people who are like, I really like some of the stuff you guys come up with, I just can't dedicate an hour to it. So I've thought about just doing kind of a show. I'm still kind of formulating it, but I'm thinking a show about, it sounds weird, it sounds like something you might not be able to sustain, but it's going to be, if I do it, it's called Everyday Silence, and it's just about kind of bringing calm into your life to do the cool things you want to do. As obnoxious and goofy as I am, I crave silence. I wake up before anybody, it's just my wife and I wake up before the neighbors, for everybody, and that's when I write, because I don't even like listening to music when I write. I like silence. And then I just started realizing I really like silence in a lot of aspects of my life, and because I can focus, and because I'm not always looking at my phone if I don't want to be looking at it, I'm able to get things done, even though I'm not the most organized person. I'm a big goofy geek, but people have pointed out, you write novels, you do these podcasts, you do several different things. Somebody told me I should do a show about productivity and organization, and it's like, well, I'm not organized. If you saw this side of my desk, you'd see just piles of paper. But it did hit me that there is a certain thing that I guess I do well, and it's just produce. So I'm thinking about a podcast along those lines as well.
Okay. Are you doing anything with respect to podcast movement next weekend here in Dallas?
The only thing I'm doing there is going and hanging out and chatting and meeting people. I was, thinking about doing some stuff. Mitch, who's one of the organizers, actually lives in town, and we sometimes get together and chat podcasting. I've known Gary, who's really one of the big people organizing it. I've known Gary for years, just through the whole podcast and actually the WordPress community. So I'm not actually doing any speaking. I think the last time I did a talk for podcasting was...
What's the talk at Podcast Dallas?
The talk at the DFW WordPress Meetup.
Oh, you did a WordPress meetup. Okay.
Yeah.
So there's a WordPress meetup next Saturday also that interested me, that Mitch had up on the slideshow during the meeting the other day.
I know. But are you going to Podcast Movement?
I had not signed up for Podcast Movement. It kind of just caught me off guard, and I didn't have the money for it when the prices were good.
Yeah, I got in on the Kickstarter, so I was able to jump on that, and it looks like it's going to be a lot of fun, and I'm always game to chat with, even though what I do is more geared toward things like fiction or geeky things. I think a lot of the crowd will be people who are more into entrepreneur interviews, things like that, which, on the surface looks like we shouldn't really be getting along great, but from what I've seen, I get a lot out of our local groups where I met you, even though a lot of the talk is about entrepreneurial stuff. But I know that when I did my talk at the WordPress Meetup, which really was about podcasting, a lot of the people who were kind of more entrepreneurial minded and let's monetize this were kind of impressed that I just came out and said, that's good and all, but why don't we do things just for the love of doing them? And I wasn't sure how it was going to be met, but everybody really seemed to like it. Even though it was probably not what they wanted to hear, because when they asked about monetization, I was like, I don't care to monetize the podcast I do with Sean, because it's really an excuse for us to hang out. I think more about the creation side of things, because that brings me satisfaction. Not that I have anything against money, or if I could think of a way to do all this for a living, I would not have my day job as a tech writer. But
Right.
when it comes to actually devoting time to thinking, I think about creating content more than how can this content make money, which is probably why I'm podcasting my fiction.
Well, the other thing about doing it for the love of it is you also get feedback and comments, and that's very fulfilling.
Yes. Oh yeah.
So
I'll go ahead.
How's the feedback been for Hell Comes with Wood Panel Doors?
The feedback is strange because I only have like a handful of reviews on iTunes, but I'll occasionally get email from somebody. And what I found out was, I started seeing some hits from China, and I thought, well, there's somehow or another that has to be a bot. But I got email from somebody last year, and apparently I don't know if I can't say a lot of people in China, but people who are living in certain parts of the world where they're really learning English because, they've gone from more third world to technology. A lot of people in China and India, I don't know if it's just me, but I've heard from some people, and they're listening to fiction podcasts because it helps them with their English. Because I guess they can kind of formulate a story, they can kind of get certain aspects of it, and it helps them, whereas I don't know if they're also listening to interviews, but I've heard from a few people who are saying that podcasts in English from Americans are helping them kind of learn what they're not learning in classes.
Yeah, because you're speaking naturally and you're speaking generally grammatically correctly, because you've had an editing pass or two, hopefully.
Yes.
They hear what it sounds like and what should be the proper way to say and form sentences and things. If they're getting the text also, that may help to learn to recognize, this phrasing and sentencing, and this word is pronounced this way or whatever.
And that's the thing that, I just did it, podcasting fiction for fun initially, but then when I started hearing from people saying, your story reminded me, even though it's not like, it's a totally different kind of road trip, thanks for reminding me of family. Even though this family is dysfunctional, they're very loving. Kind of like you'll hear people say The Simpsons are dysfunctional, but they're very loving, and you could actually take away lessons. So when I hear from people like that, it's cool. But when I hear somebody reading or listening to Hell Comes with Wood Panel Doors saying, hey, you're helping me learn English, I kind of cringe at first, but then really that's, to me, is better than money. If I'm not going to make a big living doing it, I would rather have people just get a laugh or learn something. And I never really thought about it until you mentioned, when I do something that's fiction, it is edited. It's grammatically correct. I speak much more clearly, because when I'm chatting with Sean, it's more on Men in Gorilla Suits, it's just a conversation, and we use a lot of slang. We'll drop a lot of ums, likes, things along those lines. And, we swear, we do all kinds of stupid chatter back and forth. So there is something, I think, to the precision that comes with actually having to narrate something, whether it's fiction or even a technical document, and putting that out there that helps certain people that I never even would have considered.
Very good. All right. Any last things you want to add before we wrap it up for today?
I really can't think of too much more. I've chatted about what I'm up to. I've chatted about, the surprises that come along with it. The only thing that I could add is our little motto for Men in Gorilla Suits is just taking it easy and making things. That's kind of the whole overall message of what we're about. And that came about because Sean and I are always making something. And every day, whether it's, I have a friend at work who's always talking about wanting to play guitar. Or I am always hearing people say, they want to do this thing. And I get that because for 4 years, I didn't podcast Hell Comes with Wood Panel Doors because I was afraid to do it, because I had this fear from my childhood about reading out loud. And then when I started hearing from people, what really surprised me was not so much, hey, the story made me laugh. I knew that that was going to happen because it had been considered in some competitions and by a couple movie studios. But when I started getting email from people saying, I liked the way you read it, I was really floored, almost, teared up kind of stuff, because it dawned on me I held myself back for so many years by these fears that really were unfounded. And when I just went ahead and did it, and I stopped saying I can't do it for this reason or that reason, that's when really cool things started happening. And anybody who's watching, listening to this, I don't care what it is that you want to do, just do it. If I can read out loud Mr. Dyslexia and now be confident enough that I can read, I know that when I read Old Man in November, it's not going to be the read one line 4 or 5 times. I'm going to probably be able to get through most of a chapter without a stumble. So if I could do it, you could do it. So just take it easy and make the things, do the things you want to do. That's it.
Very good. All right. Well, thanks, Chris. So if you want to learn more about other aspects of storytelling here on the All for Geek Alliance, we have the Plot Hook In, which teaches how to be a game master with Daniel Wallace, and then we have Lore Explorer by Trainer Jody, which delves deep into the lore of fictional properties. So check those out here on the All for Geek Alliance. And thanks for joining us today.
Thank you, Tommy.